Okay, good to see everybody on a Monday morning. Hanukkah Sameach. Thanks for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. Looking forward to learning Yechezkel with you. We're at Yechezkel Parak Yatet, and since it's Hanukkah, I'll try to connect it to that as well. So today, though, will be helpful if you have Yechezkel accessible, but we're also going to take a brief look at Melachim Bet, the end of Melachim Bet. So if you have a Tanakh available, or at least the Malachim available, that would be helpful. All right, so we're gonna begin from Perek Yates Pasuk Aleph, and we're gonna read this. It's gonna be almost impossible to decipher what it means without proper context. That's why we'll get to Malachim in a second. But let's at least appreciate the metaphor. Here we read, fortunately, it's not the most upbeat parak, but we read about another metaphor for something, and we'll have to figure out what exactly that is. So here we go. Parak Yates Pasuk Aleph. V'yata sakina el Misyei Yisrael. Truth is, this seems to be picking up from the conversation in Parak Yates. It doesn't have any proper beginning to it, but the Navi says, you recite an akina. Akina is, I think the word is elegy. It's a lamentation. It's a negative sort of poem about the Nisiyei Yisrael, the princes of Israel. Va'amarta, and you should say, Ma imcha leviyah. What of your mother, the lion? Leviyah is a female lion, lioness. Bein arayot ravatza. She crouches among the lions. Betoch firim ripsa gureha. Her cubs grew up among the young lions. So the image of a lioness crouched among other lions, raising her young lion cubs.
Sorry, where are we, Rabbi?
We're on Parak Yates Pasuk Bet, 19:2 in Yechezkel.
Oh, wow. Okay, thanks.
3 actually now. Vatal echa migureh kfir haya. And then one of her cubs ascends. He was a young lion. Vayilmod litrof teref adam achal. He learns to tear apart, and he eats men. Vayishmehu elav gayim b'shachtam nitpas. And the nations of the world listen to him and or hear about him, and he is caught in their trap. Vayiviuhu b'chachem el eretz Mitzrayim. And they brought him in chains. Chach is like a ring, a circular ring. So they brought this lion cub in chains to the land of Egypt. Vatera, and she, the lioness, saw kinochala, that she had lost hope. Tochelet is a word for hope, and in this context, the Mefarshim see nochala as a verb indicating that hope has been lost, which is supported by the next 2 words, avda tikvata. She had lost all her hope for salvation. Vatika chacham migureha kafir samatu. She took one of her cubs and made him into a kafir, a young, strong lion. And indeed, he walked among the other lions. He was a kafir. Kafir is like, again, Ari Bachor, a young, strong, courageous lion. Vayilmad litraf teref adam achal. He also learned to tear apart men. Vayeda al menotav. He knew his widows. That isn't a good thing. Ma'ana, says Rashi, Ma'ana tanashim b'horeget baleim. known means in the intimate sense, he would afflict widows and kill their husbands. The Arehem Hechrev, he destroyed their cities. Batesham Eretz Imloah, the land and its fill became desolate. Mikol Sha'agato, from the sound of his roar. Vayitnu elav goyim saviv min midinot. Nations from around were put upon him from the surrounding countries. Vayifrasu alav rishtam, they spread their net around him. V'shachtam nitpas, he was caught in their net. Vayitzinuhu basugar bachachim, they put him in chains. Vayiviu melech Bavel, they brought him to the king of Bavel. Yiviu bamitzadot, they brought him in the pass, in traps rather, to be caught, to be imprisoned. Laman lo yishama kolo od el harei Yisrael, so his voice should no longer be heard in the mountains of Israel. So that's the first sort of parable metaphor we have here of a lioness and her cubs. Her cubs become violent. This happens twice. They become very violent. Nations hear about this, but it is a bit, I guess, peculiar about this metaphor is that it sort of transitions from in the metaphor to out of it seamlessly. So it's talking about lions, and then all of a sudden it's talking about the king of Bavel, or it's talking about the king of Mitzrayim. So clearly it refers to not literal lions, but in both these situations, the young lion cub gets violent. The surrounding nations aren't happy about it, and then that young lion cub is taken down and imprisoned. That's the first mashal. Then the second mashal, the Navi continues. Again, this is a kina. This is a mournful metaphor. Imcha kagefen bedamcha amayim shetula. Your mother is like a vine. She is comparable to a vine on the water, laid out on the water. Poriyav anifa haitami maim rabin, fruitful and lively upon many waters. You already have seen this mashal to the vine. Vayiyula matot oz, that strong beams, el shetei moshlim, which were helpful for the staves of rulers. The beams of the vine were strong like the scepter of a king. But Tigba ko matzoa ben avotim, the vine got very high until it was between the chains, and that's literally translated avotim. Rashi explains refers to other branches, other trees with many branches. Vayera begovo berov del yotav. It was seen in its height with all of its offshoots. Very prosperous, fruitful, healthy vine. Batutash bechema la'eretz hashlachai. It was shattered in anger, thrown down to the ground. Baruch hakadim hovish priya, and the eastern wind dried out its fruits. Hisparaku v'yaveshu, they were taken off the tree and became dry. Mate uza esh achalatu, its scepter of strength was consumed by fire. Va'ata shetula b'midbar, now it's laying out there in the desert, be'eretz yavet sama, in a desolate, thirsty land. V'teitze eshi mateh badeha priya achala, a fire came from between the staff of its branches and ate its fruit. V'lo haya b'mata o shevet limshal, it no longer had a staff of strength, a scepter to rule. Kina hi vatahila kina. It is a kina. It is this mournful elegy, and she became the subject of this mournful kina. Not very happy. Such is the end of Perek Yatet. So we have two metaphors. Obviously, they're very, very cryptic when we first read them. There's not much description of what this is referring to, although I think you could wager a guess. We have the metaphor of the vine, we have the metaphor of the lioness and the cubs. So before we sort of delve into this further, what do you think this represents? What is this talking about, this chapter?
Well, kings.
Good. Which kings?
So, I mean, I just have a note in the art scroll.
No, don't tell me the note in the art scroll yet. Don't do that yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know, I mean, even if I didn't have the note, it's obvious it's kings because of Yehuda as a lion. I would have
Good.
that
So
one.
that's an important connection. In
Yeah.
fact, there is an important pasuk that I think I'd like to reference a few times today. It's in Bereshit Perek Mem Tet. That's the last chapter of Sefer Bereshit in Parshat Vayechi. Parshas Vayechi, Yaakov gives blessings to all the children. The blessing he gives to Yehuda is about kingship and the like. Let me actually turn the page over here. And in that context, he says the following pasuk, which I think it's very clear this chapter is referencing, as Sherry points out. You may have heard of it before. It's actually the second last chapter in Bereshit, excuse me. It says, just 1 second, please. Give me one more moment. Let me just turn to the place. Here we go. Gor Aryeh Yehuda miteref b'ni alita. A lion cub is Judah from the tearing my son, you elevated. Ravatz ke'aryeh, kara ravatz ke'aryeh. He crouches and lies down like a lion, ukilavi, an awesome lion, miyakimenu. Who dares rouse him? So if you pay attention carefully to that pasuk and you look at this chapter, you see a very clear connection. Obviously, Sherry mentions the lion thing. Livia kilavi miyakimenu, ben arayot ravatsa, kara ravatz ke'aryeh. Right? So that's a clear reference there. And there's another reference I actually wonder if you can spot, which is very important, I think. What other connection do you see? What other word comes up a few times? If you could take a look at Bereshit Mem Tes. The word, I probably should provide this to you. The word actually is teref. It says, miteref bini alita. Teref means to tear, to rip, to tear prey. You have ascended from teref. And if you look carefully in this chapter, and even not so carefully, what do you see again and again? What does the lion do? What does the computer do? Both of them?
They're ripping apart things.
Exactly. It's litraf teref adam achal, right? So that seems to be a criticism. So to understand this a bit better, because I know it's very cryptic, I think it is important to get the context, and I want to sort of straighten this out because I've been a bit wishy-washy about it. It's hard to remember all of it, but Yechezkel is prophesying at the end of the Davidic era. Right now, this book is dated throughout the years of the reign of Tzidkiyahu HaMelech. Tzidkiyahu HaMelech was the last Davidic king. And in his days, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and everything, and he was brought to Bavel, and that's when the monarchy totally stopped. But so when does that happen? So Tzidkiyahu, but from when he is coronated as king until the end is 11 years, or the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed in his 11th year. In the 9th year of his Milucha, the siege of Jerusalem begins, and that's, anybody know what day do we commemorate the siege of Jerusalem?
Oh, is it the fast that we have?
Just in a couple of weeks, the fast of
Yeah,
Tevet is correct. The Asara B'Tevet commemorates that. That's based on what happens to Tzidkiyahu. That happens in the 9th year of his reign. Throughout Yechezkel, we have sort of headings which tell us when the specific nevuah takes place. The last one we had, if I am correct, was in chapter 8. Parak Ches. In Parak Ches, we are told, Vayhi b'shana hashishit b'shishi b'chamisha lachodesh. Right? It was in the 6th year. The 6th year, on the 6th month, the 5th of the month. Okay, so that tells you where we are chronologically. So about 5 years before the destruction of the temple, right? So that's the chronological, that's the time period that he's dealing with, and that's important to keep in mind. But we have to go back a few kings earlier. So at this point, we're going to run through the end of Melachim. I think we've done some of this before, but we're going to do it again. So if you go to Melachim Bet, those of you who do have a Tanakh, we're going to go to Melachim Bet, Perek Chaf Gimel, 23. Give you a moment to turn the page till you get there. I'm looking at the Art Scroll Tanakh. If it's helpful, it's on page. It's on page 940. We're not going to read the whole thing. That's a lot of reading. That'd be too much. But we're looking at page 940. Melachim Bet. Melachim is after Shmuel. So it's important to remember the end of Malchut Yehuda and who the kings were. So Perek Chav Gimel talks about Yoshiyahu and the good things that he did. Yoshiyahu HaMelech was the last righteous king, and he was a very righteous king. In fact, we have an entire Kina on Tisha B'Av dedicated to him, and indeed, Yirmiyahu HaNavi, who is a contemporary of Yechezkel, who's in Yerushalayim, Yirmiyahu HaNavi, also in Eicha, mourns. One of the chapters is about the fall of Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu Melech was a great king, and he tried to raid Yerushalayim and the surrounding cities of idolatry and to get people to serve Hashem again. He tried a tshuva movement, etc. A really wonderful, righteous king. He has a very unfortunate demise. All we're told in Melachim, but this is embellished in other places, is that the king of, if you turn to, actually, you can read it inside. If you turn to Perek Chav Gimel, Pasuk Chav Tet, that's Melachim Bet 23:29. It says, B'yamav Allah Paro Necho Melech Mitzrayim Melech Ashur on the Har Pras. Okay, in his days, the Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, ascended against the king of Ashur on the Euphrates River. Vayelech HaMelech Yoshiyahu Likrato. The king Yoshio came to greet him, and greeting here does not mean to give him a big hug and kiss. It means to battle. And he got killed. He was buried. Vayikach Amaaret that Yehoachaz ben Yoshiyahu vayimshechu oto ve'amlichu oto tachat aviv. Yehoachaz, his son, is taken by the people and appointed in his place. If you remember the keynotes we say on Tisha B'Av, one of them is dedicated to this story, where the tradition has it that Yoshiyahu could have just let the king of Egypt pass without any problems because he wasn't after Yerushalayim, he was actually after Melech Ashur, but it says in the Torah that at a time when the Jewish people are righteous, no enemy army will travel through your land, so he didn't let him go, and he started up with him and then got killed. So that's the unfortunate demise of Yoshiyahu, who was a very righteous king. Unfortunately, the rest of the kings of Yehuda are Yoshiyahu's descendants, and none of them are righteous. They're all evil. So the first is this Yehoachaz. Yehoachaz is appointed by the people. You know, Yoshiyahu is this very righteous, successful king. They say, let's take his son, he'll be the king. Unfortunately, he's very bad. And you could already read just the first three psukim here. In Parak Chaf Daled, Ben Esrim Shamesh Shana Yehoyakim. Oh, did I skip? Yeah, excuse me. My mistake. If you go to Pasuk Lamed Aleph, okay, it says as follows: Ben Esrim v'shalosh shana Yehoachaz v'malko. Yehoachaz, Yoshiyahu's son, was 23 in his kingship when he began to reign. U'shlosha charashem malach b'Yerushalayim. He ruled for 23 years in Jerusalem. 23 months. Or 3 months. Wow, sorry. 3 months he ruled, not very long. B'shem imo Chamutal bat Yirmiyahu milavna. His mother's name is Chamutal. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem kachol asher asu avotav. He did the evil in the eyes of God, like all his forefathers did. Vayas reu paro necho b'rivlata ve'eretz Hamas. Mimloch b'Yerushalayim. Paro necho imprisoned him, and in Rivla, from ruling in Yerushalayim. So he doesn't rule for very long. We're told Pharaoh took him down and imprisoned him. Vayamlech Paro necho et El Yakim ben Yoshiyahu, and Paro necho, continuing here in Pasuk 34, appointed El Yakim ben Yoshiyahu, another son of Yoshiyahu's, Tachat Yoshiyahu Aviv, instead of his father Yoshiyahu, Ve'asevet Shmo Yehoyakim. And not only that, Pharaoh also changed his name to Yehoyakim. But Yehoachaz lakach ve'yavo Mitzrayim v'yam Eshem. He took Yehoachaz, the other brother who had been the king. He takes him away, brings him to Egypt, and kills him. Okay, doesn't start off very well. It doesn't get much better. So then we have, so we start with Yoshio, we have Yehoachaz. He lasts 3 months before Pharaoh gets upset at him, imprisons him, and kills him. And he appoints Yehoyakim in his stead after changing his name. If you go to Parak Chaf Daled, it's pretty similar. Ben Esrim v'chamesh shana Yehoyakim b'malcho. Yehoyakim was 25 months, 25 years old when he began to reign. V'achat esrei shana malach b'Yerushalayim, and he ruled for 11 years in Jerusalem. V'shem imo Zvuda bat Pidaya ben Ruma. He had a different mother. Her name was Zivuda bat Pidaya. Vayatz hara b'nei Hashem. He did the evil in the eyes of God, like his forefathers did. B'yamav ala Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel. In his days, the Nebuchadnezzar, king of Bavel, ascended. Vayhilo Yehoyakim evet shalosh shanim. Yehoyakim was a servant to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Bavel, for 3 years. Vayashav vayimrabo, and he rebelled against him. Vayishalach Hashem bo, God sent against him Ekedudei Kastim, Ekedudei Aram, Ekedudei Moab, Ekedudei Bnei Ammon, a lot of different nations, the armies of many different nations to fight against him. Vayishalchem b'Yudal Havido, and God sent these nations to destroy him. Kidvar Hashem, like the word of God, Asher Diber b'Yadav Adav HaNeviim, like the word of God that he had delivered in the hand of his servants, the prophets. By the way, it's very possible one of those prophets is also Yechezkel. So that is Yehoyakim. Not very good. He gets sort of attacked by various nations. We're not told why this happened, at least what Yehoyakim might have done, aside from the fact that he's evil. Okay. And then just to make a long story short, we're not going to read the rest of it inside. I think we've referenced some of it before. After Yehoiakim is taken, Yehoiachin, his son, rules in his stead. Yehoiachin, that's his son. Yehoiachin also is evil. Yehoiachin is taken by Nebuchadnezzar from Bavel and exiled to Bavel. We read about that in a few places. In Megillat Esther, we read about Yechonia Melech Yehuda, who was exiled. This whole book also references Yechonia's exile. He's the second to last king of Malchut Yehuda. And then the final king is Yehoiachin's uncle. Yehoiachin's uncle, Yehoiakim's half-brother, Yoshiyahu's son, Sidkiyahu. And Sidkiyahu is the last king of Malchut Yehuda. Sidkiyahu is the king, as I mentioned, that is in power, or at least relative power, at least has the titular crown on his head. He is the last king and the king in power when Yechezkel prophesies. Right? So that's sort of the history here. So now that you know that, we can go back and see what this chapter is really referring to. So looking back here in Yechezkel, Parak Yates, the Imcha Leviyah ben Arayo Revatzai doesn't seem to be any particular king. That's the mother, who's the lioness, is representative of Malchut Yehuda generally. The general kingship, Davidic line, stemming from David throughout all the kings of Malchut Yehuda, David, Shlomo, Rechavam, and etc. There are some good ones, there are some not as good ones, Achaz, Yehoshaphat, all these different Yechezkel. That's what's represented by the Leviah. And she's among lions. Now that we're representing that this was a powerful kingdom, a powerful kingship. Many with lots of lion cubs that lasted for a very long time, hundreds of years. Unfortunately, we have Pasuk Gimel. Batal echad migureha kefir haya. So one of the lion cubs becomes kfir, a strong young lion that's obviously meant to represent the fact that this young lion cub becomes king. And who does that refer to? Farshim explained that refers to Yehoachaz. Yehoachaz, that's the first king after Yoshiyahu. So after Yoshiyahu, the last righteous king, maybe the last good representative of the lioness, is killed, his son becomes king. What's fascinating here is that we get a little bit of a window into who Yehoachaz was. And it sounds like, what does it sound like? What was Yehoachaz known for in his very limited kingship, based on what you read here in Pasuk Daled? What was a prominent feature of his career? Or you look at Gimel and Daled, what do you do?
A lot of violence.
Violence, good. A lot of killing, bloodshed, violence. It almost sounds like it's gradual. It says, "Vayilmad litrok teref adam achal." There are, and if you would take sort of the parable here, the way it's Metzudah David and others explain, a lion naturally has natural prey, right? Other creatures, other animals, obviously a predator. It shouldn't naturally attack humans. Humans are not the natural prey of lions. it only can learn to do that if it becomes accustomed to being violent and then attacking humans. It can sort of learn to be more violent than natural. And so that is a description of Yehoachaz. Now, the way that Mefarshim explain, he begins by fighting sort of other nations, enemy kings, but that violent streak extends to his subjects, extends to other Jewish people who he brutalizes. Anyway, he starts up a bit too much, and then we have Pasuk Dal. He's brought in chains to Eretz Mitzrayim, obviously referring to the idea that this violence reached the king of Egypt, who took him down, imprisoned him, and killed him in Egypt. And that was the end of Yehoachaz. So that's the first lion cub. After Yehoachaz, we have Yehoyakim, or Eliakim, whose name is changed to Yehoyakim. And that's Pasuk K, right? She being the lioness representative of Malchut Yehudah, maybe it's the Jewish people who value the Davidic dynasty. They see something, this is a problem, they're losing hope. So they take another, like that guy's gone, they take another king and appoint this king in his stead. I guess what's sort of interesting is that it's Yehoachaz, we're told, was appointed by the people. Yehoyakim was appointed by Pharaoh. So that's an interesting point here. But there's another king, and this king acts similarly. The same sort of violence or unnecessary violence, killing, etc., ripping apart people. And it's also, it sounds like it's worse than that. It sounds like, Vayeda Aminotzav. Either taken literally to mean he actually abused women. That's how Rashi understands it. Others say it's a metaphor for sort of not only, being very aggressive to other surrounding nations, to battles he didn't need to get involved in, etc. And we see what happens to Yehoyakim. It's not just one king that attacks Yehoyakim, it's rather many kings, right? If you remember, we just read it in Parak Chaf Daled and Malachim. It's Gedudei Kasdim, Gedudei Aram, Gedudei Moab, Ammon. All these different nations are all quote unquote sent by God to attack him. So it seems like this guy was starting up with everybody. And so they all attack him and they all kill him and they take him down. So much for the career as king of Yehoyakim. And then is Yechonia, who eventually, that's not described here, is brought out of Eretz Israel, and then you have Tzidkiyahu, who's now the king. So that seems to be what the metaphor is here. You have this lioness, you have this king, this flourishing kingdom, dynasty that is at the end of its history, and you have two kings, two little lion cubs that got too violent for their own good and were taken down, were destroyed by other kingdoms. And then you have this mashal of the Geffen and the water. And it seems to be pretty similar. We've seen similar imagery before, where you have this big, valiant vine, which is fruitful and it rises to the very top, which depicts Malchut Yehudah at its height. King David, King Shlomo, they were prominent, they were successful, and other nations also saw them as a powerful kingdom, but they needed the water, they needed to be fed, they needed to be planted in the right place. And then all of a sudden, with great force, the tree or the vine is thrown down and the roots dry up, and there's a fire that consumes it, and the whole thing is gone. And actually, very interestingly, if you look at the last pasuk in the Parak Yodalid, the fire emanates from the staff and burns all the fruits of the tree. So one interpretation as to what that might represent, hi Devorah, what that might represent is the story of Gedaliah. If you remember the story of Gedaliah ben Achikam, that's Som Gedaliah. So Gedaliah ben Achikam was the last, vestige of any sort of autonomy. Let's leave her here, but trust me. Okay. Gedaliah ben Achikam represents the last vestige of monarchy, and I want to sit on my lap for a bit. Let's see how this goes. And he's actually attacked by Yishmael ben Netanya. Who is Yishmael ben Netanya? A descendant of David.
Yes.
Essentially to say the last little bit of power the Jews have is destroyed by a descendant of David, right? Because after Gedaliah is killed, that's really it. They got nothing. This is after the temple is destroyed, right? After everything has happened, another Davidic would-be ruler, somebody who wants to be king, ruins everything. And that's what that represents. So not a very happy, chapter, certainly. Okay, just give me 1 second.
She's such a beautiful little girl.
Gorgeous.
Was thinking that.
I love the curly red hair.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
All right. Apologies. I had to take care of the lion cubs.
Lioness.
There you go. Where was I? So that's this chapter. So I want to think now for a moment about what the overall message might be, aside from too much violence is bad. And then I think I'd like to relate to Hanukkah briefly. If you think about this for a second, it sort of poses a challenge, which is as follows. We have this image of the lion. Lions, and what lions are not peaceful little creatures, right? Lions are vicious, ferocious, strong. They're meant to be imposing. Like the image of a lion is meant to be imposing. It's not for, they didn't pick the deer as sort of the image of the king of the jungle for a reason, right? You don't have the deer of the king of the lion's the king of the jungle because the lion is fierce. And yet, Hashem, in depicting Yehuda as king, says, Gor Aryeh Yehuda. Yehuda is a lion. So it would seem that the king of Judea is supposed to be a lion, it's supposed to be fierce. And you have here, though, a clear criticism of that image of the lion as king, of the cub, of the kfir, who's learned to tear people. Now that's obvious. So obviously it depends when and how much, how do you use that strength and valor? But I'd like to sort of address it with going back to that pasuk I referenced before in Vayechi. In the blessing of Jacob, the blessing of Jacob says, Gor Aryeh Yehuda miteref beni Elisa. So Yehuda is a strong lion, or is a lion cub. You have ascended from tereth, from tearing apart. There are different ways of interpreting that. One way of interpreting it actually is relevant to the next few parshio, which is that Yaakov is saying, Metereth beni, from tearing apart my son, i.e. Yosef, who had been sold, Alita, you ascended, meaning when the brothers might have killed Yosef altogether, you said, don't kill him, don't shed his blood, instead we'll sell him. But there is another interpretation by the Malbim. The Malbim suggests as follows: the purpose of the image of the lion is not for violence, but it's rather almost to exude strength and might, such that no one would even attack the lion. Meaning, Miteret Bani Alita means you ascended from violence. You are not a Torah. You don't do that. You removed yourself from, ripping apart. Rather, what do? Ki kararavatska aryeh. The lion crouches. The lion essentially is in a sort of strong stance, lying there, watching. And the point is, no one's going to attack the lion, mi kimenu, because the king can exude strength and power and dominance without looking to fight. Meaning, that doesn't mean that obviously King Melech Yehuda, King Melech David did lots of killing. But the goal isn't the killing. The goal isn't the violence. The goal isn't military valor. The goal is to use that might for deterrence, to say, we are a strong kingdom. We are here, and don't attack. Don't attack. Because if you do, then we'll have to defend ourselves. But that's not what we want. That it's supposed to be Miteret B'ni Alisa. That is the point of a physically strong monarch, a physically strong kingdom. Having that monarch representing the strength of the kingdom is supposed to be Kararavatz Ka'aryeh Ukilavi Miyikimenu. Who would attack this kingdom? Who could possibly think to even bother them? They're so strong, they're so mighty. That is the point of Malchut Yehuda in that sense. And of course, it's true that it's not just physical strength. It's not just you have to be a holy king, you have to keep the Torah, and the king holds the Torah, and he has to keep the mitzvot and inspire the people to do mitzvot and to be moral people. That's all true. But there is the lion image. I don't think that those maybe that's the vine metaphor. But I don't think that is really the critique of the lion here. I think the critique is you misrepresented what the power is for. And that, I think, does, unfortunately, in a not the mightiest way, relate to Hanukkah. Something to make us think. Because as we know, the Hashmonaim were very powerful warriors. And they used their might to help God bring about an incredible redemption. And Yehuda Maccabee fought the Greeks, but when he, first of all, if you look at Sefer HaMaccabim, they were very devout followers of God, and were always davening to Hashem, and they saw themselves as successors of their ancestors in this mission. They wanted to enable Jews to keep mitzvot and not to allow for the assimilation, etc. And they renovated the Beis Hamikdash, etc. But number one, the Hashmonaim and their descendants inappropriately took the kingship, at least according to the vast majority of opinions. They were not supposed to be monarchs, and yet they took monarchy for themselves. The monarch is not supposed to be a priest, not supposed to be from the Kohanim. It's supposed to be from a Davidic descent of Malchus Yehuda, not from Aharon or Levi. So that's one problem. And two, they became very violent, generally. And this image of the king, the lion as king, became corrupted. And so one thing that I think is worth in this context on Hanukkah, thinking of the image of lion or the lion as king of Gor Aryeh Yehuda, is to consider and remember what the purpose of being strong and powerful is. In Jewish tradition and theology, the point isn't to go around killing and showing how strong and mighty we are. That might be something that is sometimes necessary, but that isn't the goal. The goal is the lion crouched in a strong posture saying, we are the king, I am the king of Yehudah, we are Malchut Yisrael.
What's happened?
Hmm,
He's paused.
yeah. He froze.
Yeah, he's frozen.
He must have an interruption in his internet.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. But you know, he's talking about a deterrent. And isn't that the same way that Israel keeps its forces strong as a deterrent today?
So
Exactly the same. Exactly. You're right.
it made me think of the whole idea of the nuclear stalemate.
Yeah, that also.
Yeah, I was thinking of that too,
uh,
Sherry.
Yeah, you want it crouching, you don't want it used.
Right.
Yes, right, exactly. So that's a oh, Robbie, you're the host now.
Oh, how did I become host?
I don't know. It just said Robbie's host.
Oh, really?
That's funny.
Yeah, that's what
He's
it
probably
said.
trying to go in again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you're right.
Oh, I
That's
don't see that
the way
online. That's
nuclear
so
power
interesting.
works. You know,
Mm.
also as a deterrent. If both sides have the same nuclear capacity, then nobody will use it. I mean, that's the theory.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so with Israel, if they're strong, you notice there aren't wars. If they give them one of those real zets, and then they're quiet for a little while and then they start all over again. And that's the strength that Israel has, keeps them quiet.
So
Not
that's-
now,
so
as they
that's-
know that he was a weak prime minister.
Yeah, which is the
Let-
whole image of that lion crouching, ready to be.
Ready at all times,
Right.
right?
Right.
Very good analogy. Yeah, it is. When you show strength, and I think the same thing has happened now with the United States. When they showed strength, nobody started fighting. There were no wars, or not like it is today.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be anti this one or anti this one, and
Just got back over here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey,
Is this ending?
we
Okay.
had our own discussion.
Yes.
All right, good. Okay, we'll end the recording.